Well, again, I would like to welcome each of you here this morning, and also a special welcome to those who are watching online today. As we mentioned a little earlier, my name is Darryl Bishop, and I have the great privilege of supporting and resourcing and encouraging those working in the seniors ministry here at Ross Trevor, and also those working in the multicultural area. So welcome to each of you this morning. I wonder whether you have ever bought new stuff to organise and hold your old stuff to make room for more stuff. When you have been down at IKEA or at Officeworks, do you find yourself bringing home another plastic storage container or a flat pack cupboard just in case it's going to come in handy? When you leased that used storage unit, did you decide to upsize just in case you need the extra space one day? Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Have you ever found yourself struggling, unable or unwilling to celebrate someone else's recognition or success or achievement? You look at them and you say to yourself, but what about me? That's not fair. Why isn't that me? Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Have you ever found your conversations with others or even your own self-talk becoming increasingly punctuated by that pronoun I? I want, I need, I did, I hope, I achieved, I accomplished, I will. I. Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Have you ever bought something thinking that it will make you better? It will make you feel better. I'll just go and buy that new top, or that latest smartphone, or subscribe to another streaming service, or go and have that manicure or that massage or that coffee, then I will feel better. Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. If any of this sounds familiar, or even if you simply understand what I'm talking about, then today's topic, as we wind up this current series of messages from Luke 12 to Luke 14 here at Ross Trevor, will be applicable to you. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus offering to us a beautiful, beautiful invitation. Jesus says, come and follow me. With these words, he calls and invites people. He invites people into an experience of life, of joy, of blessing, of forgiveness, of hope, of meaning, of purpose. But being his follower is something that is also clearly challenging, as the words I've already alluded to reverberate within our being and across our room. Watch out. Be on the guard against all kinds of greed. Our response to Jesus is a call to be a follower, not simply a fan that watches from the edges. As Tim Keller sums it up so well, Jesus offers us unimaginable splendor that requires utter surrender. It's a call to lay down our lives. It's a call to move from self-reliance to God-reliance. Self-reliance to God-reliance. So let me illustrate as I read from Luke chapter 12. We've been moving through these 3 chapters. We're going to jump back into the first chapter, Luke 12, beginning at verse 13. I'm going to be reading from the Message paraphrase of the Bible. You may like to follow it through up on the screens or on your devices, or as well, maybe even to open up your own devices to another translation. But let me read it to you. Verse 13 of Luke chapter 12. Someone out of the crowd said, "Teacher, order my brother to give me a fair share of the family inheritance." Jesus replied, "Mister, what makes you think it's any of my business to be a judge or mediator for you?" Speaking to the people, he went on, "Take care, protect yourselves against the least bit of greed. Life is not defined by what you have, even when you have a lot." Now, in the first part of this chapter, Jesus has been talking firstly about the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees. He'd been teaching the people, the crowds, about trusting God, even when we feel anxious or fearful. And what a timely word for us today. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. None of us, none of you here in this room, none of you who are watching online is forgotten by God. God knows you. He knows your heart. He knows you by name. As the crowds draw closer to Jesus, this man, tired of all this talk about peace and about hope and about trust, decides to interject. And because it's also quite culturally normal to ask a rabbi to make a ruling on a legal matter, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now Jesus sees below the surface of this demand, and he responds with a story about a wealthy farmer. Let me read it to you. Then Jesus told them this story. The farm of a certain rich man produced a terrific crop. He talked to himself, "What can I do? My barn isn't big enough for this harvest." Then he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll gather in all my grain and goods, and I'll say to myself, 'Self, you have done well. You've got it made now and can retire. Take it easy and have the time of your life.'" Just then, God showed up and said, "Fool, tonight you will die, and your barn full of goods, well, who gets them?" That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God. Jesus calls us not to be fans, but to be followers. Now, before we are too quick to judge this farmer, let's explore some of the details. Now, Jesus doesn't describe a farmer defrauding others or skimping on his tax return or putting in false claims for accommodation allowances. Jesus doesn't describe a farmer who's withholding super and underpaying his workers. See, you get the sense that this farmer is hardworking. He's got a strong work ethic. He's got a good business sense. And he manages what he does well. I imagine he's the sort of farmer, the sort of manager that we, in a Western country like Australia, that we would look up to and admire. Tell my brother to give up a fair share of the family inheritance. Now, for the interjector from the crowd, can you see? It's all about him and what he thinks is rightfully his. There's no thought of family. There's no thought of relationships, of others. Jesus, you just tell my brother to give me my fair share of the inheritance. And we pick up a similar theme in the musings of this farmer. What shall I do? I have no place to store all my crops. This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I will build bigger ones. I'll store my surplus grain. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, I counted about 8 I's and 4 my's in that passage. If you dip back into the original language, into the original Greek, you'll find there's actually more. It's all about me and my desires and my abilities and my plans and my dreams. You know, God helps those who help themselves. There's no thought about family. There's no thought about his workers. There's no thought even about God. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Watch out. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. All kinds of greed. It can be stuff. It can be shoes, books, furniture, the latest technology, paintings, streaming services, investment properties, wealth, share portfolios. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. But greed can also be about self-reliance, about significance, about success, reputation, attention, approval, love, knowledge, power, control, being right every time, being in charge, or 1,000 other things. Relying on these things, seeking these things, building our identity and who we are on these things. But let me let you into a little secret. You know, greed is not actually about any of those things. They are simply a symptom of a deeper issue in our lives. The issue is not about quantity of stuff or about status or about the size of our wealth or popularity. Greed is not about control or power or self-reliance. Greed becomes a way for us, for humanity, to deal with our own feelings of emptiness, to deal with sin in our lives. There's a black thread, the black thread of sin that weaves its way through the heart of every human being. Greed is not so much about having enough, but it's about being enough. Greed is not so much about having enough, but being enough. When we believe that we are empty, when we lose sight of who we are as daughters and sons of the living God, when we feel that we're not enough, when we think we need to be measuring up, when we think we need to be resorting to self-reliance rather than trusting God, when we start comparing ourselves with others, that is when we get greedy. We use and abuse things, and we even abuse other people in order to fill that God-shaped vacuum within our lives. In the words of that great theologian, Frank Sinatra, I did it my way. You see, greed deceives and convinces us that if we just have more of ... then we'll be ... And we can fill in those spaces in any way that we wish. You know, if I only had more money, then I would be secure in my future. If I can get more of your time and your attention and your approval, then I'll feel accepted and important and relevant. If I can gain more authority and that promotion, or if I can exercise more control in my family or in my business, then I'll be respected. Greed uses external things to cover up for the wounded heart. And folks, it never, ever works. In fact, greed and self-reliance leaves us wanting more, always seeking after the next dollar, the next piece of technology, the next qualification, the next word of approval, in order to feel good about ourselves. Greed shows us the poverty of my life, our lives towards God. Now, it may give to us a bit of a jab in the arm. It may give to us a bit of a short-term high. But greed is insatiable. It steals and it deprives us of what we truly desire and need in our lives. But there is an antidote. There's an antidote to greed, and Jesus mentions it in verse 21. The antidote to greed is to be rich towards God. The antidote to greed is to be rich towards God. To be rich towards God begins with knowing that you already are God's beloved treasure. That God alone, through Jesus Christ, is the only way to know true hope, true meaning, true peace, true joy, true contentment. To be rich towards God sets us free to, instead of choosing greed, we choose generosity. Instead of choosing greed, we choose gratitude. Instead of I, we choose others. Instead of self-reliance, we become God-reliant, allowing God to be our motivation for our lives. Knowing who we are in Christ sets us free to embrace the values of His kingdom. Values like love and mercy and compassion and justice and hope and courage and acceptance and truth and beauty and generosity. This is a parable that fits so perfectly into our present series, into being not a fan, but a follower of Jesus. Because it's a parable that challenges us to the very, very core, challenges our reliance on self, that warns us of the insatiable power of greed and self-reliance. But there are elements of this parable, there are elements of the words of Jesus that I believe takes us even further, takes us beyond what even we've spoken about to this point. Let me share with you another story. A story that I heard several years ago. A story that continues to challenge me today as a Western Christian who are part of the 1% of the world's population that controls 46% of the world's wealth. It's a story that challenges me as I walk through the slums of Southeast Asian cities, when I find myself in Melbourne and Sydney stepping over families who are sleeping rough on the streets. Let me share briefly this story. Once upon a time, there was a father who had 2 sons. And by accident of history, the 2 sons lived on different banks of the river. The father went away for a long time, and when he came back, he found the son living on one side of the river had a big, beautiful house with a manicured lawn out the front, a fountain, a circular driveway, and a ride-on mower to mow those lawns. He had 3 cars and a jet ski in his garage. In his house, he had wall-to-wall carpet, he had a marble staircase, ducted air conditioning, and ducted vacuum cleaning system. He had vertical drapes controlled by Google Home in the bay windows. He had a smart TV and an entertainment centre in every room, and a kitchen full of white goods. Out the back was a spa, a lap pool, and a sauna. It was a beautiful, beautiful home. On the other side of the river lived his brother. The only reason he was living there was by accident of history. He didn't have a lawnmower because he didn't have any grass to mow. He didn't have 3 cars. In fact, he didn't even have a bicycle. And the house he lived in was made of corrugated iron and cardboard. There was no carpet or marble. In fact, there was no floor coverings at all, just mud. The shed that housed the filter and the pump for his brother's spa was far more immaculate than the house in which he lived. There was no bay windows because there was no glass in the windows, just holes in the walls. He didn't have any access to education, and the nearest health clinic was several days' walk from where he lived. Now, if that father had any sense of justice, which situation would move him, would touch his heart more? As a parent, as a grandparent here in this room, which situation would touch your heart? Yes, Jesus doesn't make a comment about the bigger barns or the size of the crop when we read this parable. But in reading the parable, reflecting on this story, examining our own hearts, in asking the question, in what or whom do we put our trust? In reflecting upon our generosity towards others and our gratitude towards God, is it possible, because of the cultural filters that cover our eyes, that there are blind spots? Blind spots. And we miss what is potentially a justice issue. the parable of the rich fool, because that's the title there in our Bibles, is a parable about the wounded heart. It's a parable about self-reliance, about greed, and our relationships to wealth and possessions, about the source of our significance and approval, our desire to be in control. But could it also be a parable about justice, reflecting the heart of the Father in this world today? Watch out. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. It does not consist in abundance of possessions. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you." Our response to Jesus, our response to his death on the cross, our response to all he's done for us, he's calling us not simply to be fans, but to be followers. I believe his response is a call to lay down our lives for him. Jesus offers to us unimaginable splendor. But what is our response? What do you need to let go of today to more fully embrace your identity as God's treasure? What do you need to let go of today? Is it self-reliance, significance, the yearning for attention or approval, the need to be in control, being right, being in charge, to respond to the injustice of this world? Let's all stand. Whether you're here in this room, whether you're watching online, let me encourage you to stand. Let's encourage you just to spend a few moments talking to God. What do you need to let go of today to embrace your identity as God's treasure and to be more fully alive to the words of Jesus of being rich towards God? Maybe God is putting his finger on a particular thing in your life. Just bring that to him. Present that to him. Offer that to him. Allow him to pick that up, that you can more fully embrace what it means to be rich towards God. Spend a few moments in silence. Father, thank you. Thank you that each person in this room, each person watching online is your beautiful, beautiful treasure. Lord, thank you for the life you offer to us, that you can bring healing to the wounded heart. Lord, help us even in this coming week, that we can be a people who are generous towards others and continue to express gratitude towards you, because you alone provide the foundation for our lives. Lord, thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.